The day I found the hidden room in my house, I honestly thought my mind was playing games with me. For 15 whole years I had lived under that roof, slept in that bedroom, walked through that hallway, heard every crack in the walls, every groan of the floorboards, every storm beating against the windows, and still I had no idea that something was waiting behind one of those walls like a secret that had been holding its breath for years. Looking back now, it feels almost unreal, like one of those stories people hear and say, "No way, that can't happen in a normal house." But it happened to me, and the worst part is that it happened right under my nose for more than a decade. And before I get into the strangest night of my life, let me just say this. Stay with me till the end, because what I discovered in that hidden room changed the way I looked at my home, my family, and even my own memories. And honestly, if stories like this pull you in, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe, because this one gets deeper and more unsettling the further it goes. I grew up in that house. It was not a mansion, not some old abandoned estate from a horror movie, just a regular family house with faded paint, a small yard, a slightly noisy gate, and a front door that always stuck a little in winter. My parents had moved there when I was a kid, and from the moment we entered, it became the center of our lives. It had seen birthday cakes, exam stress, family arguments, silent dinners, laughing cousins, late-night tea, and all the little things that make a house feel like home. To me, it was ordinary in the best possible way. Safe, familiar, predictable. That is what made everything that happened later feel so impossible, because no one expects secrets to be hiding inside the place they trust most. There was one room upstairs, at the very end of the hallway, that had always seemed slightly different from the others. Not in a dramatic way. It was just a little colder in winter, a little quieter in summer, and the wall near the wardrobe always sounded oddly hollow if you knocked on it by accident. I had noticed that sound many times over the years, but like most people, I never thought twice about it. Houses have weird spots. Old buildings settle. Pipes run through walls. Some things sound strange and mean nothing. That is what I told myself every time. 15 years is a long time to live with something and never question it deeply. The discovery began on a rain-heavy evening when the power had gone out for the third time that week. I remember because the whole house was lit by a few candles and the blue-gray light coming through the curtains. I was moving an old wooden cupboard away from the wall in my room because I had noticed a damp stain behind it and wanted to check for mold. The cupboard had been there for years, heavy enough that it usually took effort to move, but that night one of its legs caught on the floor and scraped back farther than I intended. As I pulled it aside, I saw something I had never seen before, a thin line in the paint, almost invisible, running vertically from the floor up toward the ceiling. At first I thought it was just a crack, but the more I looked, the more it seemed too straight, too deliberate. My heart started beating harder for reasons I could not explain. I touched the line with my fingers. The wall felt different there. The plaster was colder, hollower. I tapped it lightly, then harder, and the sound that came back made my stomach tighten. Not solid, not normal. I knocked again, and there it was, that unmistakable dead sound of a hidden space behind the wall. I stood there staring at it, half convinced I was imagining things. I laughed once, nervously, because my brain refused to accept what my senses were telling me. A hidden space, in my house, after all these years. That kind of thing happened in books, in old cities, in movies, not in a modest family home where my mother kept spare towels in the closet, and my father complained when the electricity bill got too high. Still, curiosity has a way of overpowering common sense. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer, then looked around for anything that might help me inspect the wall better. There was a small metal hook near the corner, almost hidden behind the curtain. When I pressed it by accident, I heard a tiny click. It was so soft I almost missed it. Then came another sound, faint but real, like something unlatching deep inside the wall. I froze. Every hair on my arm stood up. I pressed the hook again, slower this time. Another click. Then the line in the paint trembled. I swear my breath stopped for a second. The wall I had stared at for years, shifted slightly inward. It was not a dramatic swing like a movie door. It was subtle, hidden, almost shy, as if the house itself was embarrassed to reveal what it had been hiding. My hands shook as I pushed. The panel gave way with a groan of wood and old hinges, and a narrow opening appeared. Cold air slipped out from inside, carrying with it a smell I can only describe as old dust, damp paper, and something else, something faintly metallic like forgotten time. I pointed the flashlight into the darkness and saw stairs leading down. For a long second I did not move. I just stood there staring into a black rectangle cut into the body of my home. My thoughts were all over the place. Who built this? Why had no one told me? How had I lived here 15 years and never known? Was it a storage space, a maintenance passage, or something else entirely? My first instinct was to call someone, but who would I even call for this? A contractor? My father? The police? I felt silly for even thinking it might be dangerous, yet my stomach kept telling me not to go alone. When I finally called my younger brother to come upstairs, he thought I was joking. "You found what?" he asked, laughing as he climbed the stairs. Then he saw the open panel and stopped smiling. "That wasn't there before," he said quietly. I explained how I had found the click, the hidden latch, the strange wall. He reached out and touched the doorframe, then looked at me with the same uneasy expression I felt in my own chest. We stood there for a moment, both of us silent, both of us suddenly feeling like guests in a place we had always believed was ours. We decided to go down together, because neither of us wanted to admit we were too scared to do it alone. I led with the flashlight, one step at a time, the wooden stairs creaking under our weight. The air grew colder the farther we went. The stairway was narrow and lined with old wood panels that looked as if they had not been disturbed in years. Dust floated in the beam of the flashlight like tiny ghosts. Halfway down, we found another door, this one heavier, made of old iron and wood, with a rusted handle that took both of us to turn. It opened with a deep, tired groan. And what we saw on the other side made us both stop breathing for a second. It was a room, not a big one but not tiny either. A hidden room tucked beneath the house, sealed away like a memory no one wanted to remember. The walls were lined with old shelves. There was a wooden desk in one corner, a chair covered in dust, a faded rug on the floor, a small cabinet with one door hanging crooked. And on the far wall, stacked neatly in boxes and cloth bundles, were objects that clearly had not been touched in a very long time. At first, it felt like walking into someone else's life. Everything was still, quiet, heavy with the feeling that we had crossed into a place that did not belong to the present anymore. I moved the flashlight slowly across the room, and that is when I saw the notebooks. There were dozens of them. Old, yellowed, tied with string, some stacked in piles, others leaning against the wall. There were envelopes too, a few framed photographs, and a metal tin box that looked like it had once held something precious. I picked up the nearest notebook, and the cover crumbled slightly under my fingers. On the first page was a name I recognized immediately, my grandfather's. My grandfather had died before I was old enough to truly know him. I had heard stories, of course. My father had spoken of him with respect, sometimes with sadness, sometimes with a strange kind of distance. He had been a quiet man, a builder by trade, someone who kept to himself and rarely explained his thoughts, but no one had ever mentioned a hidden room. No one had ever said he had built one beneath the house. My brother and I looked at each other in shock, then started opening the notebooks with trembling hands. What we found was not treasure, not gold, not some dramatic criminal secret like in the movies. What we found was far more personal. The notebooks were filled with handwritten entries, dates, sketches, floor plans, family notes, and long reflections about the house, the neighborhood, and the people who had lived there. Some pages described repairs, renovations, and materials. Others described emotions, regrets, fears, hopes. And slowly, page by page, the room stopped feeling like a mystery and started feeling like a confession. My grandfather had built the hidden room during a very difficult period of his life. He had written that he wanted a place where he could think, pray, store important documents, and keep private records away from the noise of the house. He had also written that the room was meant to be temporary, but over time it simply became forgotten. Life moved on. Children grew up. Furniture changed. Paint was redone. People stopped talking about the old construction work. and the hidden room, sealed behind a wall, stayed there in silence. 15 years under our feet, under our sleep, under our arguments and celebrations, while none of us knew it existed. But the notebooks were not the strangest part. Near the back of the desk, under a stack of old receipts and a folded cloth, we found a thin envelope marked with my father's name. That alone made the air in the room feel different. My brother handed it to me, and I could tell by his face that he was thinking the same thing I was. Why would my grandfather hide this here? My hands were clumsy as I opened it. Inside was a letter written in my grandfather's handwriting. The paper had gone yellow with age, but the words were still clear enough to read. He had written to my father about the house, about family tensions, about things left unsaid, about promises made and broken, and about a truth he hoped one day would be handled with wisdom rather than anger. I wish I could tell you that the letter was simple. It was not. It was full of pain, love, disappointment, and a strange kind of hope. It mentioned a small box hidden in the room that contained legal papers, old savings records, and a deed note regarding the original ownership of the property. It also mentioned that if the house ever became troubled by silence, the room should be found and opened. That phrase stuck in my mind, troubled by silence. It sounded poetic and unsettling at the same time. We searched the room more carefully after that. Inside the cabinet, behind a false panel, we found the box. Inside were documents, photographs, and a key wrapped in cloth. There were pictures of the house when it was first being built, pictures of the family standing in the yard decades earlier, and one photograph that made my chest tighten instantly. It was a photo of my father as a young man standing with my grandfather near the same hallway wall that had hidden the passage. Both of them were smiling. My father looked so young that for a moment I barely recognized him. On the back of the photo, in fading ink, was a note. For the day the wall is opened. Brother and I brought everything upstairs and called my father into the room. I had never seen his face change so quickly. First confusion, then disbelief, then something like grief. He sat on the edge of the bed holding the letter for a long time without speaking. Finally, he told us that he had known about the room as a boy. Not fully, not in the details we had just uncovered, but enough to remember his father working late nights, hammering quietly, asking him to never mention the extra space to anyone. After my grandfather died, the memory had become tangled with family issues, and the room had been sealed and forgotten. Or, maybe more accurately, it had been intentionally left alone because remembering it was too painful. He said he thought the wall had simply been part of an old repair. He had no idea the passage was still there. That night turned into one long conversation. We stayed in the hidden room for hours, reading notes, sorting papers, and trying to understand what all of it meant. There were stories in those notebooks about sacrifices my grandfather made that no one appreciated at the time. There were apologies he never got to say. There were hopes that the family would remain close even when life became difficult. There were records of money he had set aside for home repairs, some of which we had never known existed. There was even a list of small instructions for the family, almost like a manual for living gently with one another. Speak before anger grows, forgive before pride hardens, and never let silence become the longest voice in the house. That line hit me harder than anything else. Never let silence become the longest voice in the house. I thought about all the years we had lived there, all the times we had passed each other in hallways without really talking, all the unspoken tensions, all the things we assumed would fix themselves, all the moments we chose convenience over honesty. And then I looked around the hidden room again, this tiny forgotten place buried under our lives, and I understood something painful. The room had not just been hidden by wood and plaster. In some way, our family had hidden parts of itself too. In the days that followed, we had the room cleaned carefully and inspected by a professional, because the structure needed to be checked for safety. Nothing dangerous was found, thankfully. No collapse risk, no mold disaster, no creepy trap secret beyond the emotional weight of the place itself. But we decided not to seal it back up. Instead, we restored it gently and turned it into a quiet family archive. We kept the notebooks, the photographs, the letters, and the small box of documents in a secure place. Not as a museum, not as a dramatic trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that homes hold more than furniture and walls. They hold memories, unfinished stories, and sometimes truths that wait patiently for the right moment to be seen. What changed after that was not just the house. It was us. My father became softer in ways I had not expected. My brother asked more questions. I started listening more carefully when people spoke about the past, because I realized that behind every ordinary family, there may be invisible chapters no one has ever read. We began visiting old relatives more often. We asked about stories we had never bothered to ask before. We laughed more easily, but we also spoke more honestly. The hidden room had uncovered more than documents. It had uncovered a missing piece of our family's heart. Sometimes people ask me whether I was scared when I found it. The truth is yes, I was scared. I was scared the moment the wall shifted, scared when the cold air came out, scared when I saw the stairs, scared when I realized my whole understanding of my home was incomplete. But the deeper feeling was not fear. It was awe. The kind of awe you feel when life reminds you that even the places you think you know best can still surprise you, that there are layers beneath everything. That time leaves fingerprints in the most unexpected places. And that sometimes the thing you uncover is not meant to frighten you, but to teach you something you were ready to learn all along. The moral of the story is simple but powerful. Never ignore what is hidden beneath the surface, whether it is in a house, a relationship, or your own heart. Secrets do not disappear just because no one talks about them. Silence can preserve a wound just as easily as it can protect a memory. And sometimes the truth, though buried for years, is waiting for someone brave enough to open the door. So treasure your family, ask the questions before it is too late, listen while people still want to speak, and never assume that what looks ordinary has no story behind it. Because in my case, a hidden room changed everything, and it taught me that the past is never really gone. It is only waiting to be found.